Welcome to Fly on the Wall podcast. I'm your host, Chris Sonksen, CEO and founder of Church Boom. Here you get to sit in on a live coaching session as I coach pastors through the ministry challenges we all face. If you find this podcast helpful, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. We're so excited to have you on here. And before we jump into it, just want to remind you of all the amazing resources we have. Make sure to always check out churchboom.org, executive coaching, free coaching for churches under 100, Church Boom University. We just got a lot of great things to look at. Our Church Boom Network we just launched, so make sure to check that out. But today we are talking with Alan, and he has a great church in Texas, and we're talking about keys to launching another service. We actually hit two topics in the podcast: launching another service and how to deal with leaders that are drifting. Two great topics that we can all learn from. How do you launch another service successfully, but also how do you recognize when a leader's drifting? So it's a great podcast, great conversation. Let's check it out. Hey, let's jump into it today, man. How can I serve you, Alan? How can I help you today?
All right. So I want to start off with asking you what a church can do that, if you were to narrow it down to a single thing, what can we do that will add consistent growth as far as a church, the energies we can put into what we can do?
Yeah. Well, to narrow it down to one thing, that could be a challenge. But I could tell you where I would look if I was trying to do it in the simplest way possible. Here's the areas I look. I want to look and see, does this church have some sort of invite culture? Are there enough first-time guests that are going to deal with the attrition? Attrition being people leave the church, get upset, move away, whatever. Do we have enough people coming in on the front end? That's first thing. But just getting them to come in on the front end doesn't mean that they're going to stay.
Right.
And so you have to have a certain percentage. Usually it's about, you want 4 to 5 is kind of the bare minimum guests for every 100 adults. So two couples, if they're two husbands and wives, would be 4. Then you hit it for every 100. That's on the low end. 4 or 5 is better. You start getting into 2 or 3, that's a little bit of a problem. So you got to look at that front end. But the thing that I always talk about is I always talk about the speed of engagement. It is that is such a big thing. So how fast are we moving people from, okay, I checked out the church. I think I like the church. I've come 3 or 4 times. At what point do we get them engaged in the life of the church? Usually through groups or serving. So you're wanting to say, okay, so X amount of people came in. How fast are we engaging those people into the life of the church? How fast are they coming along? And so I think that's the area that I would look at. And so I think you have to look at, do we have a system in place that engages people quickly? And do we have some key staff members that are also helping to engage people? So the focus, in my opinion, the scorecard has to change, and so does the focus. The scorecard is, we usually look at attendance. I think you have to shift the scorecard from attendance to engagement.
Right.
And shift that scorecard and let that become the focus of we're doing that. So look at 2 things. Are we hitting the number on the first-time guests, and are we engaging these people into the life of the church fast enough?
That's great. I love that. I've heard you say that before, and I believe that we're starting to put some of those in practice, and
right.
We calibrate how we measure metrics because you're dead on it. That's what's going to cause people to stay is getting engaged and getting involved.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm.
I think second, I was going to ask you about the top indicators for you that you would see that tell you it's a healthy church.
Oh man, yeah, that's great. Well, I do think that there are 2 sides of the healthy coin. What I mean by that is I think there's the normal data, and then I think there's also things that are a little more untangible. So you have data on one side, and then you have sort of that spirit the heart of people. So let's look at the data side. When I look at healthy indicators, the things I start measuring on the data side, okay, let's talk about giving.
Right.
The average church in America is $35 per adult per Sunday. So are we hitting at least the average? Do we have cash reserves, or are we living check to check, as people, use that term? So I would look at those giving. I would look at, in that giving area, are we moving people up the ladder of giving? So in giving, I'm not just looking at the bottom dollar. I'm looking at, are we moving people up the ladder? Is it because we have two big givers and then they're pretty much carrying 80% of the church? That's not healthy. So I'm looking at all the giving. I'm looking at the attendance. Is it moving up and to the right? I'm looking at true salvations and baptisms. Is there life change happening? I'm looking at serving in small groups. I like to see a combined total of 60 to 70% of the church. So I like to see, in a church of 1,000, I like to see 1,000 adults. I like to see 600 involved somewhere in the life of the church. I don't want everybody involved. And people say, why don't you want everybody involved? That just tells me that we're not reaching anybody. If we have everybody's involved in our church, I'm like, well, then you're not growing, because you should have some people on the sidelines still.
Right.
So those are all the kind of the data things that I look at, and sort of check mark the giving, the baptism, salvations, engagement, the speed of engagement, the involvement. Are those things up and to the right? One thing I always say, Alan, is living things grow.
Yes.
You go outside, you look at a tree. It's either growing or dying.
Yeah.
There is no in between. Now, you've seen a dead tree die and had to be chopped down. You've seen a tree grow. It may not grow in inches high, but it's growing in leaves. But it's something. There's life happening to it.
Right.
So it's funny because I do think for a season, churches can plateau, but I don't think that can last longer than a season. That's just my personal opinion, because I think they're either slowly living or they're slowly dying. So that's on the data. On the heart and the spirit side, that is a little bit less quantitative.
Right.
But I do think that I think one of the jobs of a leader is to define reality. I think as pastors, we don't mean to, but I think we deny reality. We don't define reality. When I look at the people, when I look at the staff and the board, I want to look at, are they with me? Are they with Alan? Are they on board? Is there a toxic behavior that the pastor is tolerating? Is there a toxic behavior that the pastor keeps justifying, that he thinks it will go away? But are they healthy? Do they deal with conflict healthy? Mm-hmm. Do they handle when things don't go their way healthy, or is it just erupt everything?
Right.
So, hey, I've got to move this leader from this position to that position, and the pastor thinks he doesn't want to do it because it's going to cause a lot of conflict. But if he actually does it, and that person gets all upset, we all know that there's, that word submission is kind of a strong word. But one thing I always say, Alan, is submission begins where agreement ends.
Mm. Yeah, very good.
There is no such thing as true submission if we're all agreeing. Right. So that's not submission, But I think we confuse that as leaders when it comes to our staff and our board and our key leaders. Is like, oh no, they submit. Well, they submit as long as they agree with you. Right. But as soon as they don't agree with you, they get upset. They talk to a couple people. You have to look at those like, man, do we handle conflict healthy? Do we handle change healthy? Do we hold our position loosely? It's not just, the people love me and they're loyal to me. Like, well, I would dig in a little deeper and say, are they really? Or is it only because they agree with you?
That's good.
Yeah. And I think a lot of pastors have a way of, like I said earlier, is putting off difficult conversations as somehow they'll just go away. And I think So on that side of it, not the data side, but more the heart and spirit side, it's like, is the pastor dealing with conflict? Does the staff and key leaders handle conflict well? Do we hold things loosely, or do we hold on to titles? When disagreement starts to happen, is that when submission ends? Those are the kind of healthy things I look at. And more often than not, that side is more unhealthy than pastors are willing to admit.
That's so good. And before I say anything else, because I know you have some experience in this, it's kind of fresh too, but what would you say are one or two red flags that you need to kind of really watch for in that arena?
Yeah, I wrote a book called "Saving a Church from Itself." The subtitle, I think, is the secret sauce. The subtitle is 6 Subtle Behaviors That Tear Teams Apart. Key word being subtle.
Yeah.
If everybody on the team notices, we'll use the name Bob. Everybody notices that Bob is being, kind of disloyal. He's starting to get negative. He's starting to get critical. He's starting to have a bad attitude. By the time everybody notices it, in most cases, it's almost too late.
Wow. Yeah.
You have to notice when it's subtle. It's kind of like something's happening there. I feel like there's drifting happening. I feel like they're getting a little toxic. I think they're being a little bit more negative. I think they're starting to get a little bit more critical. I think they're shifting from having great questions to having a questioning spirit. I think that something is happening there. You have to notice it before anybody else notices. By the time everybody notices it, I wouldn't say it's completely gone, but in most cases, it's gone too far. And they're probably going to have to be removed, because for them to come swing all the way back might be too difficult. You have a greater chance when you recognize it when it's in the subtle season. You recognize it before anybody else does, and you address it. You got to keep track of the subtle behaviors. You got to see it, keep track of it, and deal with it. Man, you can't wait. You can't wait too long. Because they'll just, I always say vision leaks and people drift.
Yeah.
Vision's always leaking. People are always drifting. So you got to keep an eye on it. Are they drifting? Are they staying on? You got to keep reminding them of the vision, reminding them of our heart, reminding them of our values. But when someone starts going wayward, that's when you're thinking, I got to get ahead of this, because by the time everybody notices, it might be too late.
Yeah.
You got to deal with it. You got to deal with that tough conversation. And most people avoid it because they either have a fear of conflict or they're afraid of the fallout.
Yeah.
But
I would agree, and it's challenging. It is. It's very, very challenging.
Yep. It is challenging for sure.
Last on my list for you is, what should be in place before a church even considers looking at a second service? What kind of things need to be thought through, planned out?
Yeah. First of all, I think I think second services or additional services, to the best of your ability, should come out of need, not out of want, but out of need. And there's 3 areas I always look at. I look at the auditorium. Has it reached over 80%? I look at the parking. Is that a problem? I look at the children's ministry. Is that a problem? If you got one or more of those problems, that might be an issue. You might need to consider that. Do keep in mind that if it's not the main auditorium, that some people may not recognize the problem, because they're going to look around going, oh, there's a little bit of room here. But they may not realize what's happening in the kids or realize what's happening with the parking, because they always get here early anyway. And so you're going to need to make them aware. So first, I think it comes out of need primarily, not out of want. Secondly is, whenever you're looking at adding another service, you have to get very specific with your team on what they're going to need in order to go to that next service. So let's take children's department for an example. I need more volunteers. What does more need mean? I need more leaders. What does more mean? Does more mean 2, 4, 8, 12? What does more mean?
Right.
So if they just say some arbitrary number, they're not really planning.
Yeah.
They're not sitting down thinking, okay, I got now 2 services. I got the same amount of classrooms. Oh, I just need double. It's like, well, no, not really. I need more leaders of this. I probably need to shift this. I probably need to, like, they need to look at it from sort of an org chart standing and saying, look at it, because it might be a time for them to shift the way they're thinking in regards to the org chart, but they need to look at it. And you need to do that with children. You need to do that with worship, first impressions, ushers, greeters, all that. It's not just more. I think you have to get very specific, because here's what I have found. If a pastor pushes for a second service, third, or whatever, he knows they need it. Everybody just is like, we got to get more. The 1 or 2 people that really wasn't for adding a service because it's just more work for them, and then they didn't get the more that they needed, they'll blame you. You're the one that's going to get the blame when they didn't get prepared for it. So instead of waiting to get blamed, get very specific. Very specific. Like, okay, how many children's? How many are you going to need? More. What does more mean? Let's talk about it. 2 more leaders. Okay, what are you going to do with those 2 more leaders? I need 8 more volunteers. Like, how's that going to look? Like, push them a little, not in a bad way, but really cause them to think in every area. So, 1, again, it has to come out of need, not out of want. Secondly, you got to prepare for it. And then thirdly, I would say you got to prepare for it with the staff. Thirdly, I would shift your thinking from we're adding a second service to we are planting a second service. Change your thinking. Think differently. Because adding a second service is, we're going to add it on this date, so we end up start announcing it 3 weeks before. And then that Sunday rolls around, we keep our fingers crossed and see what happens. We have no idea what's going to happen. Versus, what would it look like if you planted it, didn't start it?
Right.
Almost like a miniature church plant.
Yes.
So, hey, say there's 100 people in the church or whatever, I'm just using even numbers. And our building isn't that big. We got 100 people. It's pretty packed out. Okay, well, we're going to go to a second service, but you'll notice there's a card on your chair. We're thinking of doing 2 services, 9:30 and 11. I don't know, whatever. Which one would you come to? Most likely.
Right.
And then, okay, which one would you come to? Your name, your email, cell phone, which one would you attend? And then how many in your family normally attend with you? 2 adults and how many kids? Now you're looking at it going, this is great. I mean, this is almost like a 50-50 split or 55-45. This is awesome. Or, it's 80-20. That's not going to work.
Yeah.
So now I got to take some of that 80% and talk them to move over into that 20% area. That's number 1. Number 2 is if you do it back enough, Alan, let's say you give yourself a 5 or 6 week runway, you start figuring out who's doing what, you can actually start targeting both of those groups as sort of like, I'll tell you what I would do. We take all those cards and we create a mini database. You are service 1, you are service 2, and all the way up to the week of the launch and 3 or 4 weeks after, I'm sending regular emails, regular texts, regular iPhone video, little 30 seconds messages from Alan. Hey, service 1, we are 2 weeks away from launching. Hey, service 2, we are 2 weeks away from launching. You make 2 different videos and they go to 2 different people, but you're building them up like, man, we're getting ready to launch. This is exciting. Not just we're starting a second service. It's almost like a mini church plant.
Right.
Treat it differently.
Yeah, I love that. That is such a better idea for having the second service than what I've seen in the past, and it's I think it would have a much more successful platform going that.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So that's what I would do, and I would yeah. And you want to talk about that more? We can talk about more of that offline. But starting that second service, man, I would make it a church plant. Make sure your team's ready as well. Otherwise, they're just going to blame you. Which, shocker. No, I'm joking.
The buck stops here, right?
Oh, yeah, it does. Absolutely. So, yeah, I hope that was helpful, man.
It was very, very helpful. We're very excited that you're going to be joining us this Sunday at Grace Place Church in Round Rock. And we appreciate, the opportunity to ask you some questions early. And I know a lot of
Yeah.
our staff is listening, and we sent out some
Yeah.
invites to other people. So
That's great.
kind of setting the table for when you come and share. So
Yeah, no, I'm excited to be with you. Thank you for holding a rescue emphasis, Rescue Sunday, help rescue some churches, and then do some coaching afterwards with your team. And I always tell people, hey, if you're going to have me in to do a Rescue Sunday, which a lot of churches are doing that because we're all partnering together, rescue churches, which is great. But I'm like, if I'm going to be there, you may as well, let's meet with your leadership, because that could be a missed opportunity. So anyway, hey, I look forward to seeing you on Sunday, man. And thanks for being on the podcast today, Alan. I sure do appreciate it.
thank you, Chris. Have a great week.
All right, buddy. Okay, talk soon. All right, bye-bye. Thank you for tuning in to the Fly on the Wall podcast. We hope today's episode provided you with some practical steps to lead your church to the next level. If you found this episode helpful, take a moment to leave us a review and share it with others. Remember, when the pastor grows, the church grows, and we grow pastors. We love you. We're your raving fans, and we are cheering you on. See you next week.